The acrid smell of burning rubber and melting carbon fiber filled my nostrils as I watched my $200,000 Lamborghini Aventador go up in flames. Not metaphorically, but literally engulfed in orange tongues of fire right there in the middle of our pristine cul-de-sac. My horrified neighbors stood frozen on their manicured lawns, smartphones raised, capturing every devastating second while clutching their morning lattes. Margaret Whitfield, our HOA president, stood 20 feet away from the inferno, somehow managing to look both triumphant and indignant simultaneously. She was frantically shouting into her rose gold iPhone while gripping her ever-present clipboard with white knuckles. Her voice carried over the crackling flames with a shrill intensity that made several dogs start barking. I warned him repeatedly that volcanic orange violated our community color standards. This is exactly what happens when residents think they're above the rules. Natural consequences, people. Natural consequences. The fire department hadn't even arrived yet, but Margaret had already marched over in her sensible flats and somehow managed to tape a fresh $10,000 violation notice to what remained of my scorched hood, the paper immediately curling from the heat. 3 months before my Italian supercar became a very expensive bonfire, I had moved into Pineridge Estates, an aggressively beige subdivision in northern Georgia, where the HOA bylaws were thicker than a medical textbook and twice as painful to read. The community marketed itself as embodying quiet luxury and architectural harmony, which basically meant every house looked identical and anything interesting was strictly prohibited. I'm Jake Morrison, 42 years old, and I just sold my logistics software company to a Fortune 500 corporation. After years of 80-hour work weeks and endless investor meetings, all I wanted was peace and quiet. Just me, my rescued German Shepherd named Tank, and yes, my prized Lamborghini Aventador. The car wasn't brand new, but it was immaculate, a 2016 model with only 8,000 miles, freshly detailed with ceramic coating that made it gleam like liquid metal. I dreamed of owning one since I was 12 years old, and after the acquisition, it was my one real splurge. I parked it carefully in my driveway under a sleek aluminum carport I'd installed to protect it from Georgia's unpredictable weather. That's when I first encountered Margaret Whitfield, a 63-year-old widow who turned running the HOA into her full-time occupation and personal religion. She introduced herself as the aesthetic guardian of Pineridge Estates, a title she'd apparently given herself. The problem started small. 2 days after I moved in, Margaret appeared at my door at 7 a.m. sharp, wearing a pantsuit that looked like it came from a 1992 J.C. Penney catalog. She handed me a laminated document titled Vehicle Color Harmony Guidelines, with an attached color wheel showing approved automotive paint shades. The palette ranged from whisper white to gentle gray, with absolutely nothing in the orange, red, or what she called aggressively luminescent spectrum. Your vehicle is creating visual discord in our community, she said, her lips pursed so tightly they almost disappeared. We've worked very hard to maintain a cohesive aesthetic that promotes property values and resident well-being. I politely explained that I'd reviewed the HOA covenants before purchasing the home, and there was nothing prohibiting specific vehicle colors. She smiled in that way people do when they're imagining your demise and said, "We'll see about that, Mr. Morrison." Then came the fines, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, $1,000 for vehicular chromatic disruption. Then $2,000 for installing an unauthorized architectural element, referring to my carport, which I had proper permits for. The third fine was $3,500 for creating an aggressive focal point that disturbed community tranquility. Margaret's complaint letters became increasingly unhinged. She claimed my Lamborghini was causing emotional distress to senior residents, that its engine noise was triggering PTSD in her Pomeranian, and, my absolute favorite, that the car's reflection during sunset was creating a fire hazard by concentrating solar rays like a magnifying glass. She even submitted a formal complaint stating that the vehicle's presence was, and I quote, encouraging reckless behavior in local youth and promoting materialistic values incompatible with our community's spiritual harmony. I ignored every single fine. My attorney reviewed the HOA documents and confirmed what I already knew. there was absolutely nothing in the bylaws about vehicle colors, and my carport met all county building codes. Margaret was making up rules as she went along. That's when she decided to escalate her campaign of automotive harassment. One Tuesday evening, I came home from a business dinner to find my entire driveway outlined in white construction chalk. Someone had drawn a massive rectangle around my Lamborghini and written "Violation Zone" in block letters. They'd even added little arrows pointing at the car like it was a crime scene. 3 days later, I found a tow notice tucked under my windshield wiper, but this wasn't any official document. It was printed in Comic Sans font on plain computer paper and signed by something called the Community Aesthetic Enforcement Division, which didn't exist. The grammar was atrocious, and someone had clearly made it in Microsoft Word 97. Margaret started holding emergency HOA meetings specifically about my car. She created a PowerPoint presentation titled "The Orange Menace: How One Vehicle Threatens Our Way of Life." She actually argued that exotic cars emit what she called toxic masculinity particles that could affect property values within a 3-block radius. She tried to pass an emergency amendment banning any vehicle worth more than $50,000, claiming they attracted the wrong element. When that failed, she proposed a rule requiring all vehicles to be covered with HOA-approved car covers between the hours of 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. But while Margaret was busy with her crusade against Italian engineering, I was preparing my own response. Being in tech, I understood the value of good data and documentation. I installed a comprehensive security system around my property, 8 cameras with 4K resolution, night vision, motion detection, and cloud storage. They were tiny, practically invisible, and solar-powered, so they never stopped recording. I also started recording every interaction with Margaret on my phone, which is perfectly legal in Georgia as long as one party consents. Within 2 weeks, I had captured some truly incredible footage, Margaret tiptoeing onto my property at 3:17 a.m. Wearing all black like a suburban ninja, attempting to smear what appeared to be mayonnaise all over my tires. Another night, she tried to superglue violation notices directly to my windshield. The best footage showed her spray painting the word "eyesore" on my driveway in what she apparently thought was washable paint, but turned out to be permanent. But the real gold mine came when I did some digging into HOA finances. Public records requests revealed that Margaret had been using HOA funds for some interesting expenses. She'd hired a private investigator to follow me and document where I drove my car. She'd paid a consultant $3,000 to research legal ways to ban specific car colors. She'd even used HOA money to print 5,000 flyers about the dangers of luxury vehicles. I compiled everything into a neat folder: the footage, the financial records, the fake tow notices, the harassing letters, and documentation of her trespassing. My attorney was practically giddy when he saw it all. We filed a restraining order against Margaret and sent copies of everything to the HOA board, the county district attorney, and, just for good measure, the local news station that loved doing segments on HOA horror stories. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at the county courthouse. The courtroom was packed with Pineridge residents, most of whom had their own Margaret horror stories. She showed up with 3 binders labeled "Visual Pollution Evidence," "Acoustic Disturbances," and "Community Harmony Violations." She'd even brought a color wheel and tried to demonstrate how orange was psychologically aggressive. Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, watched the security footage with increasing disbelief. His expression, when he saw Margaret in her ninja outfit spreading condiments on my car, was priceless. He actually had to pause the video and remove his glasses to rub his eyes. "Miss Whitfield," he said slowly, "are you seriously telling me you've been harassing this man because you don't like the color of his car?" Margaret launched into a 20-minute speech about community standards, property values, and the sacred duty of HOA governance. She actually used the phrase "aesthetic terrorism" at one point, which made several people in the gallery laugh out loud. The judge was not amused. He was even less amused when the district attorney presented evidence of Margaret's financial misconduct. Turns out she'd been issuing personal fines with no HOA authority for years, pocketing over $70,000 from various residents. She'd been running her own little extortion racket disguised as community service. "Miss Whitfield," Judge Harrison said, his voice deadly serious, "I'm granting the restraining order effective immediately. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Morrison and his property. Furthermore, you are hereby removed from your position as HOA president pending criminal investigation." The courtroom erupted. Margaret's face went from red to purple to a shade of white I didn't think was humanly possible. She stood up, clutching her binders, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The district attorney wasn't done. "Your Honor, the state is filing charges of vandalism, criminal trespassing, harassment, and embezzlement. We're seeking full restitution for all illegally collected fines, plus damages." Judge Harrison nodded. "Bail is set at $50,000. Miss Whitfield, you're looking at potential prison time of 3 to 5 years and fines exceeding $100,000. Margaret collapsed back into her chair, her carefully constructed world of rules and regulations crumbling around her. Her mouth moved soundlessly as she stared at the judge, then at me, then back at the judge, unable to process that her reign of suburban terror had just come to an abrupt and legally binding end.